All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Sudarsan. I'm here presenting resume writing to the Sase audience. Wanted to kick it off by saying sorry for a few minutes of delay. We were having some technical issue getting everything set up, but I think we're pretty much good to go. So I'm going to jump into presentation mode right now. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave it on the comment. I do have a second monitor to my right, so if you see me turning, that's probably to read what's going on and to read any questions that I have. Um, but yeah, so let's kick it off. Excellent. So today I'm going to be, as I said, talking about resume writing. This is going to be kind of a high-level presentation. We will come back to this topic in the future again, but today the overall objective is to give you an idea of looking at a resume from an employer's perspective. So kicking it off a little bit, I'm going to start off by talking about my personal background. I'm going to talk to you from a little bit from essentially a recruiter's perspective, right? What do we look for in a resume, and essentially what qualifies as a perfect resume when we're looking at it. And then I'm going to move into essentially how do you prepare that resume. So my personal background, I went to Carnegie Mellon. My expertise is in chemical engineering. I had a double major in business administration. Um, oh, I'm sorry. One second. I just need to reset this. Excellent. There we go. Sorry about that. I was just trying to figure out the controls here. So yeah, a little bit about my personal background. I went to Carnegie Mellon. I was trained in chemical engineering and business administration. Pretty much right after college, I interned at Procter and Gamble. I ended up accepting a full-time job with them. Currently, I'm working in R&D process. Basically, what that means is that I do research and development into process chemistry for Procter and Gamble. Broadly speaking, I classify my job in four ways. I try to create new chemicals. So these are basically the next generation of cleaning chemicals that might go into Tide, Gain, Sheer, Olay, Pantene, Head and Shoulders, everything from laundry to hair care to skin care. I'm sort of the base chemicals behind all of that. I also work on creating new processes to manufacture existing chemicals, as well as scaling up the processes and optimizing those processes to meet business need. Um, I've had the rare opportunity to work both in a lab and in the plant. So if any of you are interested by that, you should talk to me. You know, if you're a chemical engineer and you're thinking about what it's like to work in a plant or work in a lab, do get in touch with me for that. So I'm gonna move into a little bit about what companies are looking for. So when you think about broadly speaking, what companies are looking for, it basically splits into five major things. This presentation is from a technical perspective. I am a technical recruiter. I recruit for chemical engineering jobs. So some of this might vary a little if you're looking to work more in a business field. But I find a lot of this tends to be common across all technical companies, whether you're recruiting for a technical position at GE, at Shell, at P&G, at Toyota. A lot of us look for pretty much the same things. The big one is, of course, technical skills, right? You're being hired to solve technical challenges, to solve technical problems. So that doesn't change. The biggest thing companies look for is figuring out, do you have the skill to essentially handle the problems that they have? The next biggest one is probably leadership skills. This is really important. A large part of your job as managers is going to be managing and leading others. A big part of your success in any Fortune 500 company, or really any company, is not simply about how good you are at solving problems, but it's about how good you are at motivating others to solve those same problems, right? How good you are at making your team work for you. Most of you here are in college or you're out of college. A lot of you are almost certainly going to be managers, right? And over the years, you'll become managers of large groups of people. So the ability to be a leader is pretty much one of the most critical skills that we all look for. The third thing is ownership. Ownership comes down to being able to take responsibilities for ideas that are yours, right? The company has to believe that you are capable of taking ownership of whether it's an idea, a project, an initiative. They have to believe that you'll take it and you'll drive it. A big part of the difference between high school and college and a job is that in a job, you're being paid to be there and there's nobody to babysit you, right? There's nobody who's going to tell you, get this done, do this, do that. You're pretty much given the broad outlines of what you should accomplish and you're told to go and accomplish it. So taking ownership of the idea is a pretty big factor. The next one is motivation. Passion, right? So a big part of it is, are you driven to be there, right? Do you want to be there because it's a 9-to-5 job and because you're paid for it, or do you truly believe in what you're doing, and is that truly something that excites you? Passionate people almost always produce the best results because they actually enjoy what they're doing. So that's a big part of when we make those decisions. Finding somebody who's passionate about the work is a huge factor. And finally, there's adaptivity, right? Whether we live in a world that's constantly changing. Our market changes almost on a weekly basis. Our ideas have to change, and our products have to change. At the end of the day, that means that we want people who are very adaptive, who are very open to change. We don't want people who are resistant to it, right? So a big factor that we look at is how good you are at A, accepting change, and B, being able to drive that change forward, right? So when there's a new change in leadership, a new change in a project, are you able to take that challenge and deal with it? So broadly speaking, those are sort of the 5 major things that we look for. From a recruiter's perspective, when I recruit, the key is that we have multiple candidates for every position. Usually it's more than a dozen candidates. Oftentimes it can be hundreds of candidates per position, especially at a time like this. That really is challenging, simply because, okay, first of all, we have 100 candidates per position, so how do we narrow it down to our good candidates? The second factor on top of that is that we're oftentimes very time constrained, right? We have limited time to make the best decision. When I go out recruiting, I may have a full day to sort of pick our best candidates. Then we may have one more full day to interview our best candidates. And usually by the third day, we might have one more day of actual interviews on P&G's campus, and then we're done. So basically, we pretty much select a candidate after a few hours of interaction with them. And in total, we don't spend more than 5 or 6 days a year recruiting. This means that not only do we have hundreds of candidates, we need to be able to make those decisions without spending hundreds of hours on it, because we all have regular jobs too, right? And then the third part of a recruiter's perspective is a recruiter is extremely risk averse. What I mean by that is we don't want to make a decision that might go wrong, right? The main reasons for this is oftentimes the candidates we recruit, we're the people who work with them, right? We're the people who have to train them, and then we have to work with that new candidate. So this means it's really in our best interest to select the best candidate possible. What this means for you, and I can't stress this enough, is when you show up with a recruiter, whether you're giving your resume, whether you're talking to them, having an interview, always stay positive, right? Always be cheerful. Always create a vibe that would make another person go, yes, I would like to work with this person. The other factors about being risk averse is, do you have a proven track record, right? What have you done in the past? How am I sure that you will be good at this job that I'm about to give you? And then the last part is, will you enjoy it, right? Will you truly enjoy the work enough that you'll be around and actually do it and execute it? Will you be passionate about what you're working on? So when it comes down to making this decision, given that we have hundreds of candidates, we have limited time, and we tend to be risk averse, the resume is the tool that we use, right? That's almost always the first decision point, is picking out the right resumes. It's also interesting to note that more people are cut at the resume stage than at any other stage in an interview. What I mean by that is oftentimes at P&G, we might have, if we have one position open, we might have 4 interviews for that position or 3 interviews for that position. And we might have 100 resumes. So we pare that 100 resume down to 10 resumes very quickly. Then from those 10 resumes, we give out 2, 3, 4 interviews, which means 96% of the people who put in the resume are not going to get the interview. Once you get the interview, though, you're pretty much one of 2 people or one of 3 people. You have a much higher chance of succeeding. So getting the resume right is pretty much step 1, right? We judge a resume on pretty much how impressive and how unique it is. But there's one point I really wanted to make before I even go into judging a resume. One of the easiest tools an interviewer uses to judge college students is GPA. It is one of the easiest filters to use. At P&G, we usually use a cutoff of about 3.0. So what that means is basically when we look through 100 resumes, we only take the 80 resumes that already have a GPA above 3.0. Different companies use different cutoffs. The usual cutoff is a 3.0. There are some companies that might use a 3.2 or a 3.5, but that's pretty, it's usually around that range. So this brings me to 2 points on that. One is, if your GPA is already above that, you don't have to worry about anything, I guess. And if your GPA is below that and you're a freshman, freshman, sophomore, or junior, really work on that, right? So make sure you don't let your GPA slack. If necessary, take some easy classes, lower your course load, whatever you do, make sure your GPA doesn't fall below the 3.0. Because at that point, your resume will start getting filtered out by people who are trying to pare down a large number of resumes. Maybe you're a senior, maybe for whatever reasons, your GPA isn't the best, and you have to interview. You have to get the job that you want to get. In this case, the one thing that can override a GPA is an understanding of the candidate. If I have already met you, if I have spoken to you, if I believe that you are an exceptional candidate in spite of the fact that your GPA is below a 3.0, I would spend time looking at your resume. Towards the end, I'll talk a little bit more about the elevator speech and things that you should do while giving your resume. But really, what's important to note here is if your GPA is below a 3.0, make an extra effort to get to know the person who's making the decision, and make an extra effort to make sure he knows that you have a whole lot of skills, talents, and abilities that might not necessarily be encapsulated in your GPA. If there's a reason your GPA is low, whether it's an illness or some other factor, feel free to bring that up with the recruiter. But yeah, the one point I really wanted to drive home here is that the GPA is the easiest factor that we use when taking 100 resumes and reducing that down to 50 or 40 that we actually look at. So be very careful about that. Once we do that, now we're down to 50 resumes or so, which are above our GPA criterion, or the 1 or 2 resumes in there that may not meet our GPA criterion, but we're already so impressed with the candidate that we decided to keep the resume. We then start looking through those resumes. 2 things we look for is, 1, you want to be an impressive candidate, right? You want to fit the job that you're hoping to get. And the other is uniqueness. The reason is we get a lot of resumes. Again, we have 40 resumes, right? We want your resume to stand out from the crowd. You want your resume to be something more than what they already have. And that's the easiest way to get picked. And that's what gives you the interview, right? P&G usually does 2 rounds of interviews. We do one round of interview on campus and then 1 later on P&G's in Cincinnati if you're applying for an R&D position, or in the plant if you're applying for a plant position. Most companies do 1 to 2 rounds of interviews. Some do 3. But again, the resume, getting to the first interview is really the key challenge, because that's where most of the people fail, basically. So I've enforced on you, the importance of having the perfect resume. So let's talk about what a perfect resume actually looks like. The purpose of a resume is very simple. It's a tool to get you the interview. This is really, really important. The reason I draw this distinction, a resume will not get you a job. Even it doesn't matter what job. Even if you're applying to McDonald's, these days they'll look at your resume and then call you in for an interview. At the end of the day, a resume only gets you the interview. And what this means is that when you write your resume, keep in mind that you don't need to put every single thing about yourself on the resume. All you need to do is put enough on the resume that I want to give you the interview. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to intrigue uh, the reader, right? It's like a trailer to a movie. You essentially want to give enough in there that I will then go and say, okay, you know what, this person is interesting enough, his skills are admirable enough, and he or she is unique enough that I want to call them in for an interview. That's the purpose of a resume. It's basically an advertisement, right? It's an advertisement of a product. The product is you. And it outlines the benefits that you can deliver, right? Your brand. I'm talking a little bit in terms of advertisement and brand because that's what P&G does, right? We make consumer products. So to me, it's always remarkable when I compare a person to when I compare a resume. It's almost like an advertising brief, right? It talks about all the benefits that you can deliver in that position. Always remember that. Anytime you're talking about a resume, it's to get you to the interview. It's to be intriguing enough, unique enough, and show enough skills that I will want to talk to you further. Facts. Cold hard fact. Employees generally only scan through resumes. They rarely read every resume they have. This is cold, but it's true. An employer looking for a person, I meant employer earlier, by the way, I'm sorry. But an employer looking for a person, a position, again, might have 200 to 300 resumes to go through. He's not going to spend 10 minutes on each resume because that's just not a feasible amount of time. On average, employers might spend 10 to 30 seconds on a resume. And the third point, and this is really important, an employer will spend more time on your resume if he's already interested in you. So one of your key objectives before even giving the employer your resume is making sure that you make enough of an impression that the employer is interested in you, that he wants to know more about you. You are far more likely to be successful when the employer remembers you than when he doesn't. So, as I just mentioned earlier, a resume is about you. It's about your advertisement, right? So what do you bring to the table? What do you have to advertise? The easy way to think of it is benefit and evidence, right? First of all is, what are you saying about yourself? What do you believe to be true about yourself? And why do you believe that you'll be good at Procter & Gamble or any other company? It might be because of your nature. You might be very hardworking, very detail-oriented. You might be very intelligent. It might be because of your knowledge. You know chemical engineering, you know thermodynamics, you know heat and mass transfer. It might be because of your skills. You've worked in a lab. You've gained a whole bunch of laboratory skills. You know how to operate certain equipment. It can be because of your talents, abilities, and so on and so forth, right? Even before you start writing a resume, this is really important. Before you start writing a resume, I want you all to spend 10 minutes thinking about what you want to convey. What benefits do you bring to the table that you want to convey to your employer? Do you want to convey that you're really smart? Do you want to convey your skills? Do you want to convey your ability, what knowledge you have, what degrees you have? That's critical, right? You want a list of what you're conveying to your employer. And then evidence, right? The reason when you say, okay, Sud, I want you to hire me because I'm a chemical engineer. I have a lot of chemical engineering knowledge. I have great talents, in the lab and my abilities and so forth. Why should I believe you, right? That's the evidence. The evidence for knowledge can be degrees. It can be GPA. It can be papers you may have published. The evidence for skills can be lab projects you've accomplished. It can be work that you've done. It can be achievements that you achieved in your previous job, right? The evidence for your abilities can be, awards that you might have won, stuff like that. Basically, you need two parts to every section, every sentence of your resume almost should try to convey two things. The benefit, what do you bring to the table, and the proof that you do, in fact, bring that to the table. So when you're writing, now that you've figured out, you've listed out a set of 6, 7, 10 benefits, think of how do you build it, right? How do you build that into your resume? First of all, it's a brand, right? You've got to think about why you are not just a fit for the job, but a unique fit for the job. The other thing is transferable skills. This is something I wanted to stress a little bit more. All of you have skills, right? You might have learned that skills in your work, in previous jobs. You might have learned that skills in school, in lab, in classes. Identify them, right? Have a list of the skills that you bring to the table and where you learned them from. I'll talk a little more about highlighting your accomplishments and quantifying them later in the resume, but this is really important, is you always want to talk in terms of what you have accomplished. I'll go into a little more detail on this later. And then finally, keywords, right? If you just Google resume action verbs, you can find a whole list of action verbs. Action verbs are some of the most effective ways to convey ideas in a resume. So always make sure you use a whole bunch of action verbs. So every section of your resume, let's take a certain section. Let's say you're talking about a certain lab project that you did or your previous summer job. Let's say you did an internship, right? The first line is always going to be what you did, right? I interned at Procter & Gamble. I did this lab project. I had this job, and I did it from this time to this time. Once you do that, the entire section after that has to focus on assertion and evidence. What do you bring to the table? And show me the proof for that, right? So this is really important, and I cannot stress this enough. A resume is not a catalog of where have I worked. The worst resumes I've seen are resumes that say, I worked at Google and I worked in their product development division. I worked at Yahoo, product development, 3 months. That's a useless resume. I don't care if you know exactly where you were at that given time. What matters is what you achieved, right? A resume is an advertisement. It's about what can I do, not about where have I worked. And when you talk of that advertisement, it's about evidence, right? And evidence should always be about achievements. What sounds more impressive? Worked at P&G and worked in their R&D development division for Tide. Okay, that's information. It doesn't really push me one way or another. A more effective way to frame that: worked at P&G, worked in R&D for Tide, helped create a new version of Tide that increased sales by $1.2 million, right? What added the impact for the second sentence was the $1.2 million. It's showing that you had a specific impact on the company that you worked for, that you simply didn't work at P&G, but you made P&G better because you were there. And that's really key, right? It's always about the evidence. Pretty much every bullet point that you do in your resume, I want you to think of, A, what is this bullet point trying to convey? What quality, ability, or talent? And B, what evidence does this bullet point have that would convince somebody reading it that, yes, you know what, I think this person would be perfect for my role. Writing tips. I've sort of condensed this down a little bit because I didn't want to go too much into detail into exactly how you write. You can find a lot of it online, and I can also give a more detailed presentation if anybody's interested. But basically, when you think of writing tips, there's 4 simple ways you can write a resume, right? One is verb, object, and for whom, right? So here the example is developed an electrical consumption analysis for a commercial facility over a 2-year period for such and such, P&G, for GE. This is important, but this cannot be the only bullet point in a section, because just what you did and for whom, as I just explained, is not the most critical part of a resume. It's only part of it. The second part, right, is verb, object, and what did it result in? Designed and implemented an energy conservation program that saved $30,000 a year. That's an achievement, right? That's an accomplishment. So that's another way to write that bullet point. Third way is skills, right? What skills have I gained? Created a Homeland Security computer program for the facility using C++. This talks about a specific skill that you have, that you now bring to the table. The fact that you've used this skill before in creating something tells me a lot. And then finally, the how, right? Persuaded property owners to adopt indoor air quality programming by demonstrating the significance of IAQ pollution long-term effects. This is rare. I wouldn't suggest using it too often, but the benefit of using the 4th format, verb plus object plus how, is that it also demonstrates creativity, right? It shows that not only are you capable of doing something, you're capable of doing it in a different or creative way. And therefore, it can be an impactful point. Do's and don'ts of a resume. Again, these are pretty standard. On the do's, standard fonts, Times or Helvetica, nothing special. Do not use any really crazy fonts. If you play with different fonts, like you want to use different fonts on the same resume, do it carefully. Um, I'm sure if you talk to any English literature major, they'll tell you a little more about, you don't mix serif and sans serif in the same line or the same paragraph. That's really important. Um, if you want to keep it simple, you can just use one simple font for everything, or two fonts, one for heading and one for everything else. In general, you're not trying to impress them with your font, so don't get creative. Always use white or light colored paper and print only on one side. This is really important because most companies scan in the resumes and then they use e-readers to read that resume. So if you use a really crazy color or gray color paper, that can actually mess with a lot of scanners. So always use simple white color. Always provide originals, right? Take a bunch of it to the interview and that way you can hand them out. Never run out of your resume, especially at a job fair. Make sure you have an email and phone number appropriate for business. This is really important. Check your voicemail, right? If your employer calls that number, you just gave him the number when you gave him the resume, make sure your voicemail is appropriate, right? So that's an easy sort of thing to trip up on. And then action verbs. That's what I spoke earlier. Always use action verbs to make critical points. On the don'ts, don't be wordy and don't lie or exaggerate. It's really important on the lie part, right? At the end of the day, it's surprisingly easy to catch some of the lies on a resume. Be very careful about that. You also don't have to state any physical data, physical appearance, marital status. None of that is required on a resume. And because that shouldn't, your employer should not be making any of those decisions based on physical or personal data. Don't put salary requirements on a resume or salary history. It's very important, right? You're nowhere close. In general, a good rule of thumb is that you don't want to talk about salary, either your expectations or what the employer might give you, all the way through to pretty much the last interview. You only talk about salary pretty much right at the end when you know you have a good chance of getting the job. However, I know a lot of students come to me and say, well, Sudarsan, I'm really curious. I want to know how much I'm being paid. Otherwise, how do I make a decision if I have to invest all this time? If you're in college, which as most of you are, talk to your career center, right? Most career centers have great information on what employers normally offer. The other thing is, of course, Google, right? I use Glassdoor. That's a very good website. There's other websites out there. Basically, you can research and find out what a company is offering or what a position offers. But in general, don't talk salary on a resume. Don't use fillers, right? This is really important. It doesn't matter that your resume is really, really big. Your resume doesn't have to totally, absolutely fill up one page. The important thing there is that if you put a whole bunch of crap on your resume, the odds are I'm only going to read 10% of it and say, okay, I'm done. This isn't important, and then put it aside. Even though there might be other stuff on your resume that's really good. You're much better off just putting your best points on the resume and then omitting everything else. It's okay if your resume has a little more white space as long as the points that you have on there are compelling. Also, always remember the primacy latency principle. The primacy latency principle basically states that people are far more likely to remember the first part and the last part of something. So again, people are far more likely to remember the beginning and the end of your resume than the middle. So just remember that. And then finally, do not use your resume as an information dump, right? A resume is about convincing the person that you should be hired. It should be about what do you bring to the table, and here's the evidence that you bring that to the table. It's not a list of A, B, C, D, and E. This is especially true when you're talking about jobs that are not relevant to the job that you're applying to. Let's say you want to work at P&G or GE as a chemical engineering or mechanical engineering intern. Putting your job at Starbucks may not be a bad idea if you can show that there were skills that you gained at Starbucks that you can bring to table at P&G. Do not put a whole list of jobs. I worked at Starbucks. I was a librarian. I did this. I did that. When none of that is relevant to P&G. What's more important is saying, while I worked at Starbucks, this is what I achieved. This is what I learned. I gained these skills. I help Starbucks in this way, and make sure that is relevant to the job you're applying to. Common mistakes that I see on a resume. The biggest one is adding too much high school information. Most of you are in college. High school is almost irrelevant. High school gets you into college. It doesn't get you a job. High school's already done its job. It's gotten you to the college that you're at. Right now, focus on college. The exception, of course, is if you're a freshman, obviously you don't have enough college information to have a lot of stuff on there. That's okay. But once you're a sophomore, and almost certainly when you're a junior, start taking high school information off the resume. This is especially important because a lot of you tend to have the college and high school information at the top of the resume. This basically means that if you put high school as well up there, you're wasting 3 or 4 really valuable lines, because those are the lines I'm most likely to read. It's right on the top of the resume. The second thing, adding common or irrelevant information. One of the most common things I see here is courses, right? There's nothing wrong with listing courses on your resume, but you do not want to list courses that every college student takes. This is really important. If you're a chemical engineer, you tell me you're a junior chemical engineer at Syracuse, at Carnegie Mellon, at any school, automatically I'm pretty much going to know which courses you've already taken. I know that as a junior chemical engineer, you've already taken basic chemistry. You've taken at least 2 courses of calculus. You've taken thermodynamics. You've taken heat. You've taken basic fluid dynamics, things like that. Spending half your resume describing those courses does not help me at all. It's irrelevant, right? Every single junior chemical engineer that I'm going to be interviewing has done that. And you want to distinguish yourself. So that's really important. Don't put stuff on there that every student already has. Put something unique. Let's say you're a chemical engineer, but you've also taken some courses in biochemistry or some courses in business administration. This is something you bring extra to the table. So when I'm comparing your resume to every other resume of a chemical engineer, you have something extra. And then finally, small errors, right? Do not have spelling mistakes on your resume. I cannot stress this enough. There is nothing that is more unprofessional or turns off an employer faster than having spelling errors on your resume. After you've looked over your resume at least 3 times, give it to at least 2 other people. Maybe a roommate, maybe a professor, maybe somebody at your career center, maybe an employer who you're friendly with and who'll be willing to edit your resume. Make sure you do this. Make sure that multiple people edit your resume. Finally, customize your resume, right? Tailor your resume to your target audience as much as possible. Now, this gets a little tricky. Most of you might apply to dozens of jobs, maybe even 20, 30, 40 jobs, right, when you're at a career fair. And it's impossible to have 40 different resumes. It's too much work. So the way I usually would suggest doing this is having a couple different resumes for different types of jobs. Let's say you're a chemical engineer. You may want to work in the petroleum industry, Exxon, Shell, BP, all of those companies. Or you may want to work in the consumer products industry, P&G, Unilever, Kimberly-Clark, L'Oreal. So a simple way to do that is to have 2 different resumes. One that's a little more tailored towards chemical and petroleum companies, and one that's a little more tailored towards consumer products. So basically think of the 2 to 3 different types of jobs that you really want and tailor your resume to be a perfect fit for that job. The other thing I always get asked is a cover letter. Are they good? Absolutely. A cover letter can be very powerful if it's well done. It allows you to specifically focus on why you are a good fit for that company. There is nothing more useless than a generic cover letter. In fact, the words generic cover letter is almost an oxymoron. The idea of a cover letter is to show that you really care about that job a little more than just dropping off your resume. A cover letter should always be specific to that company and to that position. Oftentimes, the way I do my cover letters is after I give a resume to an employer and then spend a lot of time talking to them, then I send the cover letter later with another copy of my resume saying, hey, it was a pleasure talking to you on this and this day. A cover letter can also be substituted by an email in today's world, right? The easiest way to do that is get the employer's email and then 3 days later after the career fair, send them an email. This is really important and a really good tactic because oftentimes employers make those decisions 1 to 2 to 3 days to a week after they collect all those resumes. So sending another reminder that, hey, remember me, we met, I'm still very interested in your company is a great way to do it. And then finally, make it unique and personal. Again, never write a cover letter and try to send that to 30 companies. It's very obvious and it serves no purpose. What else? The last thing you need to go with your resume is yourself, right? An introduction. You need to introduce yourself with your resume. The standard speech is, they call it an elevator speech, right? The reason it's called that is if you were to meet somebody in an elevator, and you had to introduce yourself, what would you say? So it's a standard 15-second to a 2-minute speech. I usually do my elevator speeches closer to 1 to 2 minutes, but this is really a key part of a resume, right? Because it makes you memorable. It sets you apart. This goes back to what I said earlier. An employer will spend more time on your resume if they remember you. So make sure you introduce yourself and make sure you give a good introduction that sets you apart. Make sure your introduction supports your concept, right? Why you would be a good fit for this job. What are your benefits and what are your reasons to believe? Always make sure you give an introduction with a resume. Even if the employer is busy, he's running somewhere, try to talk to him for at least 30 seconds. Make sure that 2 days later, when the employer looks at your resume, he can remember your face and remember what you said. Thank you very much for coming. I'm open to questions now. I'm just going to plug my computer in for a second while you guys think of questions. Cool. Questions, ideas? Okay. Well, either I did a really good job or I did a really bad job because there's no questions. Well, I think that's it. Jake, Alvin, are we set? Yeah. Oh, one other request, everybody. If you all could please take a short survey. I'll post the survey right here. The survey is tinyurl.com/SASE webinar resume. Let me see if I can post that. Oh, I guess we can post that. Okay, so just to give you that one more time, it's tinyurl.com. That's tinyurl.com /SASE So that's simply tinyurl.com/Sase webinar resume. tinyurl.com/Sase webinar resume. If you all could just go there and fill out a short survey, we would really appreciate it. I'm just going to throw that up on my screen so you guys can see it. 1 second. Thank you, everybody. If you could just go to this website right here and fill out the short survey, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. And if any of you have any questions on your resume, please feel free to get in touch with me. Most of you see me on the Facebook page. You can just send me an email. I'm going to put down my personal email here in a second. This is my personal email at my PNG email. That's venkatallam.s@pg.com. Please feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. I'll be happy to review your resume, anything at all. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Okay, I think